what their opinions and perspective were on physicians as CEOs of health systems, provider groups, payer organizations, healthcare technology organizations. So that's where the research began, quote unquote, my unscientific. So these are deep dive conversations with, it ended up being around 29 healthcare industry leaders, all C-suite level, many CEOs, some CMOs. About half were physicians, about half were not. There's a lot of good stuff in those 29 or so conversations I had.
I may suggest to you, it may be some of the most truthful and honest, valid impressions that any of us are going to hear on a podcast. So I'm really excited to get into this because I do believe, based on what we talked about, you've unearthed some very interesting observations and thoughts. Hello and welcome to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. I am your host, Lee Scheinbart, and this podcast brings you the hottest and most crucial conversations in healthcare and physician leadership. Today, we're going once more into the mysterious world of the executive search industry with our guest, Steve McGovern, the president and CEO of McGovern Executive Search, a healthcare-focused executive search firm he founded in 2011. With more than 25 years in the search industry overall and over 2 decades dedicated exclusively to healthcare, Steve has led hundreds of senior-level searches for payers, providers, and healthcare solution organizations nationwide. Steve earned his BA from the George Washington University in the Foggy Bottom area of D.C. He completed his first physician leadership search in 2005 and has since recruited dozens of physician executives into vice president and C-suite roles across Fortune 500, not-for-profit, and privately held healthcare organizations. Based in Northern Virginia, Steve displays 2 things that I feel compelled to highlight for our audience. For starters, Steve demonstrates an impressive knowledge about healthcare, particularly around finances and within the perplexing payer-provider universe. Steve posts his thoughts and observations regularly on his website, as well as on LinkedIn, and you should follow him and check out his posts. Second, Steve also plays in a band, Diplomatic Immunity, throughout the D.C. area, and if you live in that area, it might be fun to check out his band. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Lee. It is great to be here with you. And yes, DC area folks, come and check out the band. Interesting little fun fact is my wife is the drummer. So this is a family event every time we have a show. But yes, we've been doing it for 12, 13 years now. And it's good to get an old man like me out of the house and to play for people literally half our age and to learn songs that you probably don't know, Lee, and I would never know if I didn't have to learn them for the 25-year-old audience. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
That's a great hobby, and it sounds like a good family hobby as well. So thank you for sharing that with us. So last time we connected, you reminded me that our paths crossed many, many years ago, and we have more than a few mutual acquaintances. But when I asked you recently about your history of podcasting, you mentioned that you've been part of a show related to wine or wine tasting or something like that?
Yes, it's called The Wine Guys, and my co-host is going to love this because he's the producer of that and does all the hard work. I just sit there literally, taste wine and opine about it. I have the easiest job in the world. I just show up. He prepares binders and binders of notes and research, and I just give my opinion. So yes, The Wine Guys, and apparently I think it's WHINE. Yes, because we like to complain about things in general. But yes, that's when he's down in Virginia Beach. So a few 100 miles away, we would get together and do that. And we both fancy ourselves as subject matter experts, but that's always a dangerous way to fancy yourself.
Yeah, I mean, to tell people you're a subject matter expert on wine is one thing, and then to go out and perform in a band is another thing. So I think we've established a little bit about who you really are, and now we got to get into the awesomeness of the things that you do, and we're going to really dive into this. So are you ready for this?
Yeah, this is going to be fun. You picked an amazing topic, and it has been bouncing around my brain. I'll let you take the lead with it, but this is a fascinating topic. So thank you.
All right, we're just like in the band, we're going to riff off each other. We're going to improv a little bit, but I want to tell the listeners a little bit about what's going on, and then we'll get into it. So as we talked about, you really sparked my interest. You have done an exploration into healthcare organizations ranging from medical groups and employed physicians through hospitals and larger systems, and began to assemble information as a result. And why don't you explain to the listeners what you did, and then I'll hit you with the first question or two.
Yeah. So, doing this for 22, 23 years, being an executive search dedicated to healthcare, all I do all day are talk with healthcare executives, payer, provider, healthcare technology, startups, all that kind of stuff. And so over that span of time, I've done a lot of physician executive search and physician leadership search, as you mentioned earlier, and had some opinions kicking around my head. And then I think you and I first connected on some posts I had put on LinkedIn about perceptions and misperceptions of physicians as CEOs and the good, the bad, and the ugly. So we started talking about potentially, getting together and having this podcast. And then that sent me on rabbit hole after rabbit hole, realizing that my job is to talk to these wonderful, educated people about their careers and about their perspective on the healthcare industry in the U.S. today. So why not hijack all those conversations and ask my dear friends and some of these folks I've known for 20 years, some of them 10 years or less, what their opinions and perspective were on physicians as CEOs of health systems, provider groups, payer organizations, healthcare technology organizations. So that's where the research began, quote unquote, my unscientific. So these are deep dive conversations with, it ended up being around 29 healthcare industry leaders, all C-suite level, many CEOs, some CMOs. About half were physicians, about half were not. So you get a lot of opinions. You get a lot of very strong opinions. I'm going to be very careful what I say. I will. One of the things I found funny is on the non-clinician side, when I asked this question, one of the first lines about just everyone's mouth was, "Please don't quote my name." So that tells you a little bit of where their perspective is coming from. They have very strong opinions that they don't want their physician leader friends to know about. So I think that's something to unpack here. And there's a lot of good stuff in those 29 or so conversations I had.
Well, listen, that's a monster task with a full-time firm and playing in a band and sloshing around some wine. That is a full-time task. But I may suggest to you, while it isn't scientific or, at the Deloitte or McKinsey level, it may be some of the most truthful and honest, valid impressions that any of us are going to hear on a podcast. So I'm really excited to get into this because I do believe, based on what we talked about, you've unearthed some very interesting observations and thoughts. And maybe the anonymity actually plays to your favor to really unpack what's going on. So let us start with a basic format here. From this work that you did, roughly what % of boards seem to prefer a physician as their next CEO? And what are the main drivers that you identified around board preferences for physician CEOs, or the opposite for that matter?
Yeah, so that's a tricky question. So we should give credit. You mentioned McKinsey, and that started some of our dialogue about this. They did a article. I'm just looking over here to make sure I quote it, the name it correctly. The next specialty, the physician CEO, and they do their own. Not as scientific as my research. I kid, but they do their own research, and they published it, and we're riffing partly off of that. So some of the data that I'm going to present is based on their findings because I did not talk to 29 board members. So I want to make clear, a lot of the folks that I did talk with do sit on healthcare boards, coincidentally, at this point. So I don't want to present the number of percentage of boards that are pro or anti physician CEO, but we can ballpark it based on the McKinsey data, based on some Deloitte data that's out there, and it's probably around 20%. And that's up from what the actual facts on the ground are right now. It's about 15% across healthcare, all subsectors of healthcare, of CEOs are physicians. So it seems to be trending in a positive direction. But I think there's more talk about it now than there is actual activity. There have been 50 hospital CEO changes in the last 18 months. And the biggest determinant of whether the CEO was going to be a physician was if the prior CEO was a physician or not. That meant more than all the talking you and I are going to do or any training anyone can do. Which is not to say that it's not possible. As you know, change in our industry happens painfully and slowly, and it has to build momentum. And I think we're at the momentum building point. And I think a lot of things that have happened in healthcare since COVID, on both the provider side and even on the payer side, are pushing us to an inflection point where, hey, we have these really talented, really passionate people who know the industry in some ways better than anyone. Maybe we should start looking at them more seriously as CEO candidates than we have previously.
Thank you for clarifying. And yes, that's what sparked our reconnection after many years was your commentary, if you will, on the McKinsey report. And this is a growing phenomenon in the sense of awareness and opportunity. And to your point, if past behavior predicts future and a system or an organization has gained familiarity with physicians as CEOs, sure, that makes more sense. I guess part of what I'm curious about underneath that, do you see some slow trending either in your own observation or the other reports where that is shifting a little bit, that there's more dialogue, more openness, more thought around bringing physicians into that CEO role?
Yeah. So I think we kind of need to break up the different parts of the provider world. If you look at the academic medical center world, in my own team's research, about 80% of the larger AMCs are actually run by physician CEOs. And that is continuing to trend in a positive direction. So meaning that 5 years ago, it wasn't 80%. So that's definitely a sign of hope. Another rabbit hole that I don't want to take you down because it's got we could do 5 episodes on this, is the healthcare startup space. And I think the stats are something like, 1 out of every 20 of those startups actually are successful at the end of the day. But it is a place where entrepreneurial and business-minded physician leaders have gone, and they've actually had a great deal of success. It is giving some attention to the fact that, there's a lot going on, and these are high-achieving individuals who have accomplished a lot. And I think that's opening eyes.
Steve, yeah. All right. So we hit on academics. We talked about startups. I know there's more, but I want to interrupt, if I may, for just a second. So what I think a lot of people fail to recognize, it's not that they don't know it, they just don't put it top of mind. For most physicians, for the period between, say, the 1950s until mid to late 90s, they were by definition business owners / entrepreneurs, because, all day long from early in the morning until roughly sunset, you're busy seeing patients. And then somewhere in between, you're running your business. All of the work that needs to get done to understand the flow of the money, the borrowing, the paying, the billing, and the collection. So I do think that physicians have at least a moderate amount of skills and capabilities. They don't necessarily have capacity because they're busy seeing patients. So you hire an office manager, you work with an outside consultant to get things. And so it isn't unexpected that physicians are able to pivot to the startup universe in health tech and health care, not only because they understand the clinical, but they have the aptitude to quote, run a business, because they've, for the most part, the past has been a predictor that they can do it. Now, the economics of healthcare have shifted whether physicians want to be that person or not. And we're seeing this wide variation, right? So many physicians are under some kind of employed contract arrangement, approximately 2/3 in the United States. And putting that aside, then we see people in specialties or concierge medicine who are practicing and running a business. And so it can still happen. So anyway, I wanted to share that. Now, so you started with academics. You talked about that entrepreneurial group. What else are you seeing relative to physicians as business leaders and CEOs?
Yeah, great point. So, and thank you for bringing that up. And I think just if I could piggyback on that one little point of that, family doc who is running a practice and also running a business at the same time. I think one of the dynamics that's changed in our industry is the corporatization of medicine, and that there's no judgment in that. But we're now dealing with multi-billion-dollar companies on both sides of the fence, payer and provider. I think we all know that 60 some odd percent of revenue coming into healthcare is now from Medicare and Medicaid. So that's changed a lot from, being the family doctor who's running a small practice. On the not-for-profit integrated delivery network side, you see a greater percentage of CEOs than you've seen in the past. In the for-profit, it's a little less. If you look at the top 10 for-profit IDNs right now nationally, I think 20%. So 2 out of 10 are the CEOs are physicians. It's closer, or it is 30% if you look at the top 10 not-for-profit IDNs. And then if we're not really focused on the payer space, but payer space has generally been a little bit behind the curve, but you're going to find payer physician CEOs more, again, in the not-for-profit payer world, regional not-for-profit health plans. We know of some folks who run those and as physician CEOs and are well respected in the industry. So yeah, I think that covers all the buckets if I'm recalling correctly.
Perfect. Now, just conjecture, and you can take the fifth. You're not on the stand, but you're on the stand. In the not-for-profit sort of slight trend line that you're hinting at, that we're seeing more, any thoughts or statements that people made that got inside your head as to why? And I think it's probably obvious as you describe the corporatization of healthcare and why for-profit industry hasn't moved much on that top tier. But in that not-for-profit tier, what do you think's going on if there's a subtle slight shift towards more physician CEOs?
That brings up another matter that I think we're going to get to, but who's really determining who selects whether there's going to be a physician CEO or not, or whether a physician CEO is a must-have, a nice-to-have, maybe have, or a definitely not have. It's boards of directors, it's governance bodies, and it's those boards at those not-for-profit institutions that are looking at their competitors and peers in the industry rather, and saying, okay, well, it seems to be something, it's trending, so let's kind of follow their lead because they're so well respected, and let's jump on the bandwagon there.
Yeah, I definitely want to go there. So let's hit that right now. So let's just imagine that somebody places this item on the agenda at a board of trustees meeting. We know Joe intends to retire in 18 months. He's given us that time frame. We're all good with that. So let's put on our search, put that on the item, and somebody wants to talk about the system down the way that has recently brought a physician on. What do you think and as you've leaned into this and you're putting it all together in your mind, what do you think they're saying in those rooms? Pure conjecture on our part, what those board members are saying about, is it a good idea, bad idea, I don't know idea about the physician as CEO, what's in favor and what's against, and so on and so forth.
Well, I think there, again, we cut to one of the core qualities or characteristics of our industry. It's risk averse. We're not known for innovation and imagination in the healthcare space. And there's a reason. There are good reasons for that. There are lives at stake, literally. And compliance is a big issue across the board. And, doing the right thing when we have such heavily regulated, when CMS is so involved in the administration or the delivery of healthcare and the payment of it at such a great rate. So what are they saying? I think, again, conjecture, as you point out, there are discussions that they're basically trying to figure out, where does the industry go next? How do they survive, especially as regional? Let's think about that. A lot of these regional not-for-profits are concerned about being acquired, that there's this level of M&A activity. And so what is going to position the organization best for long-term success? If you're a not-for-profit, you're community-based, you're community-driven, you do not want to become part of some larger entity, although we see that M&A activity continues to happen across the space. So I think there's a desire, what is going to best position us to succeed as an independent delivery system in our region? And then beyond that, I think, one of the other parts of lack of imagination and creativity is you point out exactly what you're describing as succession planning. And succession planning is very well done, believe it or not. This was actually news to me during the research for this project, in the AMC space, in the academic medical center space. The 80% of AMC CEOs that are physicians, only 20% of those hadn't been with that institution for less than 10 years. So what does that mean? They went to medical school there. They were at a director level. They ran a service line. They rose through the ranks. It was pretty much known that Bob or Sue from whatever area in the organization was going to be the next CEO. Now, that's not very encouraging for everyone on the outside because it's basically, in the AMC world, at least, it's very well determined ahead of time. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, and let's open that aperture up a little bit. So there's a little comfort zone, a little familiarity. They have this, and it's a very, in my opinion, traditional academic view is this: we grow our own, we know what we're dealing with, our culture. We don't want a lot of change, and I think that's about to get blown up right now because so many institutions have seen a loss of or a decrease in federal support,
Yeah.
particularly on the research side. And I'm pretty comfortable saying that their war rooms are open and they're trying to figure out what are our additional sources of revenue to fund or float our research mission. And
Yeah.
that will create some consternation. So at a board level, right, they have fiduciary responsibilities. One of them is succession planning, right? Every board that's at a governance level, they know that they're instructed by somebody on some subcommittee every year or every other year. Let's just review the succession plan. It's just,
Yeah.
right. They do that, but they have the mission at hand. They have the financial stewardship at hand, and they sort of have the governance obviously at hand. Now, in that middle piece, that financial stewardship, depending on where they're located, we don't want to be acquired. We don't want to run aground. We don't want to explode. And so we need a leader who can march us through this and or at the same time be innovative and stay on the cutting edge and all of the and I'll say the financial impacts, more not so much the corporatization, but all of the economic constraints, the iron triangle, they say, of healthcare economics. It is hard to figure who is the best leader, physician or not, and so I'm tracking with you, but I'm also suggesting that there are responsibilities of the board that can make it a challenge to determine the who, much less their credentials and their background. So,
Yeah.
your reaction to those statements?
Yeah. They're in a difficult spot, boards of regional players like that. And I do think that there is a realization and an understanding that because of everything that's happened in the last 5 years, the level of burnout among clinicians, the level of turnover among leadership positions, not just CEO positions across, both regional and national organizations, that we're at an inflection point. Things need to change. We need to look more creatively at, who should be in the C-suite, not just the CEO. And then that kind of cuts to the heart of the matter of what we're talking about here. There are very unique characteristics that we most would acknowledge. Even, the ones who are in the nay column among the folks I talk to, the non-physician CEOs, that clinicians bring to the table, and physicians in particular bring to the table, around their empathy, and not only empathy for patients, caregivers, for family members, but also for other docs and other practicing clinicians that have been through the 12-hour shifts, that have been through grueling medical school. They understand it can really ultimately create more cultural cohesion, can create more of a mission and purpose-driven organization. And these are things why I think some boards are starting to gravitate toward physician CEOs, because they have these unique attributes that, again, forgive me, my CFO friends and COO and CLO friends are not going to have. So, I do think there is a reconsideration of, is this the exact right time in the trajectory of healthcare to start looking at the folks who've been on the front lines? So they have empathy and understanding for that. They can say, I've walked in your shoes. They can really resonate across an organization. And does that build kind of this cohesiveness that a regional player needs to survive with all of the economic pressures around them?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. And the word that is popping into my head is that the physician as CEO can be a universal translator. They have lived it. Sometimes, look, we're all human. As physicians, we get sick too, so we become patients, and we know the delivery side of it and all that squishy in between, both the emotional, empathic stuff, and who all is on that front line with us, who participates with us. Our nursing colleagues, our respiratory therapists, our physical therapists, our radiology techs, our administrative teams, our office managers, just the whole gamut.
Yeah.
And so there's really no substitute for that depth. And I'm just going to guess, though, at the same time, and I want you to hopefully expand on this, that maybe some of those attributes are that boards shy away from or don't want some of those things. And so maybe you share what you perceive are the sort of the negative anchors, the albatross around the physician neck.
Yeah, this is where I risk getting into trouble and
No
having
trouble here,
no,
not by
no,
me.
no. So the two most common, and I don't think I'm breaking any new ground for physician leaders out there that are listening to it, is business and finance acumen. And we have to go to the cliche, no margin, no mission. Had lunch with a mutual acquaintance of ours yesterday, a very successful physician CEO. And we were talking about his training, which was, granted, a number of years back. But he remembered getting yelled at by a fellow clinician during rounds when he asked what a medication cost. And that is because it is in the physician ethos to always do what's clinically best for the patient. And there's no consideration of cost. And I'm going to sound like the horrible shill for the payer industry now, but we're all dealing in a population health environment. When you have the government, whether you're a card carrying socialist or a free market libertarian, the government is paying for 60 or more percent of the care in one fashion or another. So we're making collective decisions. As much as we want to, take patient A and go to the nth degree of every possible intervention for that patient, we have to consider the overall cost. And the whole no margin, no mission cliche, as we know, is if a health system keeps on doing everything to the nth degree for every patient, they're not going to exist. They're going to go under. And then where's the mission at that point? And that applies across not-for-profits, for-profits, every organization. You're not going to be there to care for patients if you don't keep in mind the economics of healthcare and understand the economics of healthcare. Whether we like it or not, we're all in this together and we're all in this healthcare ecosystem. So that's one. And now the second, this is where I really get into trouble, more controversial. So I'll put it this way. I think most would agree that medical school training, probably at least up until the last 10 years, I've heard that it's evolved a bit, is very hierarchical. It is not collaborative. It is not, well, what's your opinion? No, if you're the attending physician, your name's on the top of the chart and someone's life is on the line. It is your opinion. What you deem appropriate is going to be the care that is prescribed. That's not the way the corporate world works. And also something that I think even the McKinsey research points out in some of their interviews is as you were slaving away in medical school, and then with your internship and fellowships and all of that kind of fun stuff into your probably mid-30s, the rest of us were going to business school and actually working in corporations and learning, I love this fake term, this made-up term that an executive brought up years ago, corponics. How do you speak in corporate speak? How do you speak this business language? How do you interact with fellow executives? One of the physician leaders I spoke with said he got into a lot of trouble early on in his first administrative leadership position because he was used to the Socratic method. And it's great asking 20 questions when you're trying to explore something with fellow clinicians. If you do that in a board meeting or you do that with a bunch of C-suite executives, they're going to get very threatened very quickly and think, who is this guy or gal that's just peppering me with 20 questions? And so it's learning to live in the corporate world. And it's a leadership skill set that is not really focused on in medical school, which again is more top-down, less collaborative, less interactive. And I'll throw in one last point on that. Within the corporate world, receiving feedback and giving feedback is a day-to-day thing. And that has to happen for corporations to be successful, healthcare organizations to be successful. That is not something that is very common or encouraged in medical school training, as I understand it.
Yeah, no, I think we're getting a lot better in that feedback realm. And I work with enough medical students and trainees to appreciate it, but it's more about how to learn. Are you learning how to learn? Can I help you see this from a different perspective, which is incredible because, when I was in medical school and I wasn't doing well in anatomy, they just sent me to the dean's office and the dean said, get your shit together or you're out. And there's no feedback. I didn't know what I didn't know. And I think we're radically better at our undergraduate medical education. I think we're progressing in our graduate medical education. So I agree with you. What I'm hearing, what I'm translating is that these are leadership skills that are not rigorously taught uniformly in the medical education trajectory. There are pockets of it. There are places doing quite an amazing amount of work on this, and not all physicians that come out of school want to be in these roles that we're talking about. I recognize that, nor should they be. There are some outstanding professional clinicians that have no reason or business being in the business of medicine. They need to be where they are, and they are good there, and they don't need to learn a whole new set of skills to succeed. But those who do want to find themselves in boardrooms have to shift their mindset, and through no fault of their own in their training. Yeah, you need to be more collaborative. You need to be more thoughtful. You need to listen. Your opinions may not matter as much as the opinions of everybody else. And that is just a mind shift. And I think that boards and decision makers also need to open up a little bit and begin to understand that it is doable. Don't put the doctor leader in a box, especially if that doctor leader has gone on and tried to learn those skills to do that. Where I think there is a beautiful, portrait that is emerging from what we're talking about is, and many of our listeners do not like the statement, no margin, no mission. And what I believe, and I don't have any evidentiary documents to share, but that systems that I have a great deal of respect for, they have such a mission that their margin follows them. They are so mission oriented, so missional, that their margin follows. And what that means is when you are rounding with the doctor and that conversation comes up on the cost of the antibiotic that's asked, and the clinician at the bedside said, well, this is the very best antibiotic, and I don't know how much it costs. The conversation should be, are we absolutely sure that is the right medicine that is both cost effective and effective and affordable? And so it's not that you're putting the margin first, but the mission is to provide the best cost-effective care, and just twisting the language and knowing that it does matter. And if we do the right things, more people will come to us. And in a volume-based world, that matters. And in a value-based world, that matters. So it's very, very subtle. And it's a long way of saying, I do think that there's an opportunity to lead the mission as the board wants, with empathy and compassion and perspective, and be business savvy and be financially astute at the same time.
I think you hit the nail on the head in that a lot of this is language that we use, and we, like in a lot of society, we get into our respective corners when you hear terms like value-based care and phrases like no margin, no mission. What rational person or what ethical person would say that, no, we don't want to do the best for every patient? No one is saying that. But I think if I'm kind of teasing out what you're saying appropriately, part of the mission is being there for as many patients as possible. And we're only going to be able to do that if we make quality cost considerations around the care that each patient receives. So
yeah, it's very subtle, very nuanced, which is the skill set of a leader, because leadership is very, very hard. All right, I want to do some sort of rapid fire to get through a couple of these other questions. And Steve, as you and I talk, we may have to bring you back. And there's so much to explore here. So what have you learned relative to the views about chief medical officers and how that role fits or doesn't fit on a trajectory towards the CEO seat?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So there is a school of thought that the worst possible thing you can do if you want to become the CEO of a healthcare organization is become the CMO of an organization. And the thinking behind that is you're getting typecast and you're getting kind of thrown into this box as a clinician's clinician or a doc's doc. So what you want to do, and if you're on the leadership path to being a CEO and that's your ultimate goal, it's much more effective or more impactful to own a P&L, to run a service line, to have non-clinical folks report to you, to have to see the holistic parts of the business. What are the cost drivers? Where does a dollar go? Who's paying for what? And understanding that from a more holistic perspective. Another common, pathway is if your health system owns a medical group, transition to a COO or a CEO role of that, that's a great stepping stone to a CEO of a health system or the parent organization. So the CMO can get a little kind of boxed in into that clinical track. That being said, of the 28, 29 leaders that I spoke with, half of whom were physician leaders, I can think of 3 off the top of my head that were CMOs. One, a very CMO of a very large health system, not too far from me, who became the CEO of a hospital as the next step in his career, a multi-billion-dollar hospital in a major American city. So it's very doable. It's very possible. But I guess one of the things, a couple of the terms that came up in talking with the physician CEOs that I spoke with, being intentional about all the choices you make and taking the pathway of being a CEO as seriously as you took your clinical training. It is, and the McKinsey article I think is called, the next specialty. And so being relentless in your pursuit of what you don't know, being relentless in trying to understand. One physician CEO said the first administrative leadership meeting he sat in on, the CFO gave all the numbers and he was just flummoxed. He was like, what the heck is this guy talking about? And so he made a point at the end of that meeting, acting with intentionality, to go up to the CFO and say, hey, I want you to explain all of that to me. What does all that mean? And the CFO kind of laughed and said, but you're the CMO. Why do you need to know that? Which, again, is very revealing. But my friend persisted, and soon enough, he was speaking finance fluently at board meetings. So it's that intentionality and that passion. So CMO can be a path. It's probably not the best path. The best path is when you own every aspect of the business, when you're running a mini kind of CEO shop of your own, and you have all the different levers at your disposal, not just the clinical component.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. There are skills just to become a good CMO. And obviously, I'm very deeply involved in that. And I think that there's a whole nother set of skills to be a CEO. Just because you're a physician doesn't mean you're qualified to be a CEO. Even if you run your own family practice office or a single specialty group, there are still other things you need to know and to do. And I think your advice is very, very strong about taking on a service line, be an operating officer, run a medical group, so on and so forth. I agree with all of that. Do you think there are some particular milestones or signals in a physician leader's career that tell a board or signal to the board, yes, this person is CEO ready, so that they stop putting the doctor in the box and go, oh, maybe this person doesn't fit into and may be ready? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that in different variations I posed to a lot of folks that I spoke with in preparation for this discussion. And I think the day you kind of hit on it there, the day you walk into a room and people don't think, oh, there's Dr. Lee Scheinbart. The day they start to think, oh, there's the leader in the organization who happens to have this great treasure trove of clinical experience with him and all these tools in his tool belt that the CFO and the CLO and all these other folks don't have. So it's getting to a point where you're talking the same language as the other business leaders. It's where you've demonstrated the ability to lead teams effectively, cross-functional teams, not just folks that you would have traditionally worked with in the delivery of care model. So, outside of the clinical world. And it's also when they see a level of strategic thinking about the organization emanating from you. So when you're in those meetings and it's not just, one of the other knocks, and again, I don't know why I come back to this, you're a physician, and I'm talking to physicians, but is that physicians are taught to make decisions with as much information as possible. And there was one physician CEO who I spoke to who said, I used to want to be 90 to 100% certain before I went down a certain path prescribing something for a patient. As a CEO, you cannot be perfect like that. You have to accept making decisions all the time with imperfect information, because that's the way the world works. And so I think when they see the ability of someone, in their leadership team to deal with that ambiguity, to deal with, we can't check every box. So I think when you're starting to be seen as more than just a clinician and viewed as such, then the board would see you as more of a likely CEO candidate.
Yeah. All right. So we want to go down this pathway for just a second. So for physician leader, physician executive leader, CMO title notwithstanding. Let's take this broad swath of these physician executives, perhaps many are CMOs, and you're doing your source work on behalf of your client who is searching for a CEO of medical group, hospital system, full IDN. And you've gotten past the written part, that CV, that resume, and you begin to think about how do we want to present and position this individual in front of the hiring management, the talent acquisition, the HR, and ultimately the board. How do we help, or how do you advise that leader to not be seen as Dr. Scheinbart, but as Lee Scheinbart, a qualified individual? How do you shape or mold or advise that candidate to help them not be seen in the box? Is there anything you have advice or experience relative to this?
Yeah, I do. It's tough. And I think one of the points we need to come back to is when you have a search comes in to my firm, it's generally very specific in terms of what the requirements are. And then, what those specific requirements are in terms of the must-haves become legal requirements for us as a firm and from a compliance perspective for the organization. So it's pretty strict in terms of following and adhering to that. So you can't be someone who you're not. That being said, I think, making sure you're positioning yourself again as a business leader, as a well-rounded business leader. And when you're, just in conversation, the things that you're focusing on, are you just, talking about this very, what would be considered to a board member minutia of some, clinical program, or are you talking more broadly about where the industry is going, where the business is going? Are you thinking at the 30,000 foot level and expressing thoughts that way? But again, I do want to come back to the lack of imagination in executive search hiring across our industry and across every level, for-profit, not-for-profit, AMC and not. Generally, when we get a spec for a role, it's okay. We want someone who's done this exact job just, across the street at the other health system or across the street at our biggest competitor. So we have to be realistic about that. So you're never going to be able to be something you're not. You're never going to, no matter what you say, no matter how you present yourself, your credentials and your experience is what it is. However, when you're in discussions and being interviewed and considered for positions like this, if a firm like mine has, the confidence in you as a candidate, then they believe that you talk the talk and that you are a well-rounded business leader who happens to have a clinical background.
I love that. That very insightful, and I imagine we'll get some comments along the way as we share this with our listeners, because unfortunately, a lot of physician leaders, and look, even the term I just used, physician leader, and the rest of the world wants you to be a leader who just so happens to be a physician. And I think that's the same struggle as back in the day when we first called physicians providers, and physicians just went off the roof on that one. And that's a discussion before the band goes on, when diplomatic immunity goes on stage. We'll do that in a more social environment.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, listen, this has been an absolutely fantastic episode, and I do expect you and I will remain reconnected and probably have you back on the show. Thank you very much for being on the show and for all the things that you do to match leaders of all stripes in healthcare, whether they be physicians or not, or any other clinician, and whether it's the ambulatory, inside the hospital, in the payer universe. We can both agree, perhaps all of us can agree, we need more intentional and mission-driven leaders in healthcare more than ever before, and they do need to understand that margin has to be there. So it's not an either or, it's a yes and appreciate all the work that you've been doing. Any closing comments before I wrap it up?
This has been too much fun, Lee. Thank you so much for having me. We could go on literally for hours and hours. I don't know that anyone would be listening at the end of that, but
no, they won't.
Love to continue the conversation and can't thank you enough. It's been great.
Yeah, absolutely welcome. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you have been listening to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. You want to learn more about what it is like to be a CMO or how to get on the path to become a CEO in healthcare? check out our website, thefirechiefcmo.com, and connect with me and Steve on LinkedIn. I love talking with CMOs from all over. Get out there, be a chief, run your own company, run your own healthcare company, try a new bottle of wine this weekend, get a new hobby. But whatever you do, in the words of Sergeant Phil Esterhaus, remember, let's be careful out there.